are in the middle of a series titled, They All Fall Down. If you're coming in late, and like I said at the beginning, my name's Adam. I'm one of the pastors here. Excited to be with you guys tonight as we continue this series. And kind of the basic premise behind this series is that each and every one of us in our lives have these things called idols. And these idols have control and influence in our lives more than we probably realize. And over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about some of these issues. You remember the first week, we kind of gave a setup to what it looks like to just talk about idols. And last week, Lindsay did a fantastic job talking to us about the idol of approval. And so today, we're going to continue with this series. But maybe as a recap, to simply make sure we're all on the same page, because I realize some of us maybe haven't been here in a couple of weeks, or maybe we're new for the first time. Kind of a simple working definition of an idol is that an idol is really just whatever or whoever we give central value in our lives. So when you think of idol, don't necessarily think of like this golden monkey statue you have in your room, like something off Indiana Jones. No, an idol is something that resides deep in our heart that we give value to, we give worth to, we give influence to, and we make it become a priority to the point that we seek it out, and our actions, our thoughts, and various elements of our life are directed and controlled by that thing. It becomes an idol, something that we worship and want and desire. Now, I could say this, and maybe you're in the room and you're like, oh, okay, cool, idols. And you could go really kind of easy with that, right? You could say, man, Adam, if I'm being honest, an idol for me is football. Like, I love football. I think about football all the time, especially during the fall. It's like football, football, football. You know, Arkansas won a game, and so I'm even more excited about football. My mood is based on whatever team I love, how they're playing. I love fantasy football. I check my thing like 16 times a day to make sure nobody's on the COVID list anymore. I love football. I live for football. You're right. I give it value and central in my life. Or maybe for you, you could say, you know what, like, for me, maybe it's something simple. Maybe for you, an idol is your snap streak. You want to make sure you get the right number. It keeps going. You never want it to end. You talk about it. You tell people about it. You brag about it. You make sure every single day, no matter what's happening, like you could be on a desert island stranded and you would find a way to send a picture of sand so that you could continue that snap streak. It becomes an idol. Yeah, sure. Those are great examples. They're actually really surface level examples. And what I want to do is I want to challenge us tonight to think about idols a little differently. I think, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I think the idols that we have in our lives are generally much, much more complex than that. Perhaps the best way to think about idols is to think of a tree. So I'm going to ask a question, and I need participation here. So just wherever you are in this room, if you want to pull down your mask for a moment, or if you already have it off, that's okay. You're going to be able to yell this out, and I just need the first thing that comes to mind. When you think of a tree, what do you think of? So I heard leaves and branches were the main things I heard. If you said leaves and branches, congratulations, you were right. If you said anything else, you were wrong. Leaves and branches are the first thing human beings think about when they think of trees. If you thought of something else, you might not be a human being, because there is a right or wrong answer to this one. It is what we think of, right? Because when we look at a tree, right, like if there was a tree on stage, we would see the beautiful, big, giant green leaves that are starting to turn fall colors of red and orange and yellow, or in Arkansas, straight to brown and dead on the ground, right? Like they're trees, we notice their width, their breadth, their height. We notice the leaves and the branches. It's what's visible. Now, if you were to go ask an arborist, someone who studies trees, a professional who researches them and knows all the intricate details about tree life and all of those things, they would tell you that yes, while branches and leaves are significant in the life of a tree, and while the trunk is significant as well, they would tell you, and I think all of us know this on some level when we think about it, the roots are the most important part. The roots are where the branches get their life. The roots are where the oxygen and the water and all of these things come from. But even more interesting than that is, depending on the type of tree you are looking at, the root system, according to most arborists, will be anywhere from 3 to 12 times wider and longer than the leaves. Why? Because for leaves, the surface level is only a glimpse of the roots under the surface. And maybe the way we need to think about idols is that idols, while we want to focus sometimes on the external visible branches of money, sex, family, relationships, football, whatever it is, the idols can be traced to much deeper, extensive root systems. They are the things that feed the visible idols. The things that cause us to want and desire the thing that we think is an idol. And so tonight what I want to do is I want to look at, it's really two idols that are kind of tied together intricately. And this is the idols of comfort and pleasure. The idols of comfort and pleasure. Now, we live in a society, a culture, right, United States of America, where we have this elusive term that we all, on some level or another, subconsciously strive for. This thing called the American dream. Now, if you were to kind of go back 100 years or 200 years, whenever it started, I don't know the exact date, and you were to do some research on the American dream, what you would find is that the American dream, its root, its history, its origin was a very good thing. The American dream was rooted in the idea that like you could have two people sitting right here, and one of them could be born in a royal family from a king, and one of them could be born a farmer in the South. But ultimately in America, they both could be something. They both could do whatever. The opportunities were limitless. But over time, and I think we feel this subconsciously, in America, the American dream has evolved into something new. If you're a grown-up, the American dream is now, hey, the American dream is making sure that you have a nice car and a nice house and your kids go to a nice private school and went to a nice college and you can take family vacations and retire well one day. That's the American dream. If you're a teenager, the American dream is, hey, you know what? It's high school and college, the best years of your life. Do what you want. The American dream for a teenager is hopefully not having a whole lot of homework, not having to work a whole lot of hours, being able to have a hot boyfriend or a hot girlfriend, being an athlete or being popular or something else, but also being able to do the things you want to do that make you happy and have fun in the process. Why? Because the American dream now is about comfort. If you want to come to America and live in America, it's the land where you do what you want. It's the land where you don't have to do what everyone else says. You can be comfortable and you can do the things that make you happy. You can be comfortable and seek pleasure. It's the American dream. And I think for some of us, this comes in many, many forms. For instance, for some of us, the comfortable life means sitting down after a long day at school because it was hard and difficult and just going into our room and enjoying a show on Netflix and wanting our little sibling to leave us alone. That's comfortable. For some of us, we find pleasure and comfort in turning on our Xbox or our PS4 after a rough day and just destroying some of the people in whatever game that we happen to be playing in that moment. It's comfortable. And we find pleasure in it. For some of us, comfort and pleasure can be found in a relationship with a certain someone, a significant other, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or in a set of relationships, a friend circle. When we are with them, we feel comfortable. We feel happy and joy and pleasure in life. For some of us, we can find comfort and pleasure when we pull out our phones or our iPads and switch Safari to a private browser and look at things that no one else should know about. We find comfort and pleasure in that. For some of us, our comfort can be found in just being able to fit in with people around us. Conformity. For some of us, our comfort and pleasure comes from being able to do what we want, having independence, not having our parents come into our room and tell us to shut the computer and go and take our little brother to his 14th soccer practice in the past week. No. We want to do what we want and go where we want and act the way we want because we live in a society that says, if you get enough stuff, life will be good. If you do the things you want, life will be good. If it makes you feel good, if it's pleasurable and brings you joy, that's the goal. And I think one of the most dangerous parts of this is that deep in our core, when it comes to comfort and pleasure, I think a lot of us feel that we have a right to it. We feel that we deserve it. We should have it. We deserve to sit back and relax. Right? Like we spend all of our time at school being taught and doing tests and doing this and doing that. We deserve to come home and do what we want when we want, the way we want, right? We get our car keys. We deserve to be able to go to our friend's house if we want to. We deserve to do what makes us happy. We deserve to have pleasure, to have comfort. We earned it. We deserve to buy that, get that, enjoy that, watch that, eat that, and do that. We deserve it. And what's funny is we think we deserve it in such a way that when people try to deny us it, we're willing to sin. Right? Like we've all had those moments where it's just been a long day. It's been tough, it's been difficult. Maybe something happened at school or with a friend circle or with a team or something, and we just want to go in our room and be left alone, and we close the door, turn on Netflix, fire up our computer, pull out our phone, do some double taps, whatever it is we happen to be doing in that moment, and we're just there relaxing, and the next thing you know, there's a knock, knock, knock. Mom or dad comes in and says, hey, I need you to go help me do this, whatever this happens to be, or can you go do this? And what do we say? Mom, Dad, gosh, I just got comfortable. We would rather choose comfort over relationship. We would rather choose pleasure over obedience. Why? Because we deserve it. We earned it. It's part of our lives. Now, hear me. I want to make sure that I say this clearly because I don't want anyone leaving here and sending texts to each other or telling their parents, like, man, this guy named Adam, he came up and he told us that, like, we're not allowed to have fun and do comfortable things. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that, in order to be uncomfortable and follow Jesus, you need to live your life sleeping on a bed of nails and wearing trash bags and not having any friends and only doing things that make you cry and sad. That's not what I'm saying. Because I think at a deep level, I think comfort and pleasure are not bad things. I want you to hear that. Being comfortable is not a bad thing. Doing things you enjoy and things you find pleasure in is not a bad thing. In fact, I would argue that the God who created each and every one of us, whether we believe and follow him or not, the God who created the universe, the God who sustains and made everything and holds it all together every single day with his breath and his word, that God is a God of pleasure. That God is the God who made things to be enjoyable, right? This one will come out of nowhere, so just get ready for this, right? If our God was a God who didn't want us to have pleasure, why did he create sex? He very easily could have said, you know what? The way that human beings are going to procreate is they're going to high five and then they will be pregnant. He could have easily done that. Now, obviously, football celebrations would have been a lot more awkward 9 months later, but he could have done that. Instead, God said, you know what? Let's do something for them that can bring them pleasure. Our God creates sunrises and sunsets and mountains and oceans. And if you like theater, if you like whatever it is you like, he creates those for your enjoyment and for your good because our God is a God of pleasure and he wants us to experience that. So comfort and pleasure are not bad things. In fact, I would argue that comfort and pleasure are actually something that our soul wants. They are something our soul wants. For the Bible scholars, the theologians in the room, you'll know this story, but for those of us that are not as smart as you, maybe let's go back to the Garden of Eden. And Adam and Eve, the first male and female that were made to live in perfect harmony with each other in this place called Eden, where everything was incredibly comfortable. Right, like you had two people who basically God's like, here's a garden with all sorts of animals and fruits and meats and all this stuff. Do whatever you want. They could walk around naked. They could have all the pleasure they wanted. They could smile. They could laugh. They could talk to God. They were comfortable. They could decide, today I am doing nothing but laying in these leaves. Today I'm doing nothing but skinny dipping. They could do whatever they wanted. They had ultimate comfort and pleasure. It was perfection. God created that for them. Then, for those of us that know the story, what happens just a couple chapters later in Genesis chapter 3? They step outside of God's will to find pleasure and comfort and disobey. So they take something good, food, fruit, and they take it out of God's will, and sin enters. You see, it's interesting, so many times in our quest for comfort and pleasure, it's not the bad things we do. Sometimes it's the good things we do outside of God's will that actually cause the most harm. So they eat this fruit, and sin enters the world. And it's interesting if you go back and look at Genesis chapter 3 and how it describes the consequences of this sin. It says things like, because of your disobedience, you will have pain in childbearing. You will have pain. It will be uncomfortable. The man will sweat and work and toil the fields, and it still won't produce what he wants. He will live a life of discomfort working the fields. You will have strife and enmity between you as man and woman. It will not be comfortable. Life will not be all about pleasure anymore. And I would argue, and maybe I'm wrong, and you have every right to disagree with me, but maybe, just maybe since that day, for thousands and thousands of years, our hearts have been longing for a return to a place of comfort and pleasure. Our soul wants it. Look at some of the examples in Scripture where God's people have desired this and sought after it. In the Old Testament, when God was first building a nation, the nation of Israel, the Old Testament people of God, one of their very first stops was slavery in Egypt. And before we get to the miracles and all this, we see what it's like for them to live in Egypt. And check this out in Exodus chapter 1, and just listen to the discomfort they experience in this moment. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. He said, come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will multiply. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us, and they will escape from this land. So what do? It says, therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh's store cities of Pithom and Ramses, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread abroad. So listen to this. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people, so they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. They made their lives bitter with hard service and mortar and brick and all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they made them work as slaves. That's not a comfortable environment. They were working in slavery and toiling and working and working and working. They were being whipped and being beaten and driven like slaves. Their taskmasters were all over them. There was no comfort at all. There was definitely no pursuit of pleasures in their life. They weren't able to just be like, hey, you know what? We're going to take the afternoon off and go watch this. No. It was work, beat, barely get food. It was hard. It was difficult. It was uncomfortable and devoid of all passions and pursuits in life. And then God, by his sovereignty and miracles, you know the story. He brings in Moses and he does these miracles and these plagues and he frees his people and they part the Red Sea and they go into the wilderness. They are now free. But look in Numbers chapter 11, what happens when they're there. It says, now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving. I just want to pause. When it comes to our fight against comfort and pleasure, so many times it just starts with a strong craving. And if you struggle with this, you know what I mean. It says they had a strong craving. And the people of Israel also wept again and said, listen, oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we had in Egypt that cost us nothing. We remember the cucumbers we could eat. We remember the melons that we could eat. We remember the leeks, whatever those are. We remember the onions and the garlic. Oh, but out here in this desert, our strength is dried up and there's nothing to look at but this manna. What are they saying? They're saying, listen, God, we would rather go back to that place that was uncomfortable over this. Why? Because that was better and more comfortable than this crap we experience here. They were willing to go back to slavery to be comfortable. Our hearts long for it. Fast forward to the New Testament. You see a group of 12 or 11, depending on when you count them in the Bible, of men who have been following Jesus for the prime teenage years of their life, about 3 of those years. They have been everywhere with Jesus. He found them fishing on the side of a lake and told them, cast out your nets. It's what they were born to do, to be fishermen. It's all they ever knew. It was the most comfortable thing. And they could get on the boat and they could laugh and they could pursue pleasure and passion. And it was great and it was exciting. And he calls them and says, hey, I have something bigger for you. You will be fishers of men. And then they see him for 3 years, miracle after teaching, after resurrection, after performing all these things. They follow him, they learn from him. And then they see him on his final night tell them, you are going to go out and do greater things than I have ever done. And then they see him hung on a cross, dead. 3 days later, after he was buried, 3 days later, risen from the dead. And he comes to them and he tells them again, there is a calling and a mission for your life where you will go, you will make disciples, you will disciple, you will teach, you will baptize, you will do something big and mighty and awesome in the name of God if you stay within my will. And what do they do? John chapter 21, check this out on the screen. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. You have Simon, Thomas, and Nathanael all there, the sons of Zebedee and 2 others. Simon Peter says to them, so they're kind of there and they're like, okay, well, like he's gone now. What do we do? He says, I'm going to go fish. They all look at him and say, we'll go with you. Listen, they knew what God's will was for their life. And they said, you know what? Man, it'd be much easier to just go fish and be comfortable. It'd be much easier to just do that thing that brings us pleasure and joy than this thing that God is calling us to. Comfort and pleasure have a draw in our lives. We are drawn to it. And I would argue the draw that our soul has towards it is so strong that we are willing to sin to get it. We are willing to go outside of God's will that he has clearly revealed to us in order to find comfort and pleasure. What about you? Are you so driven to make your life full of comfort and pleasure that you will easily cast aside your standards, your morals, Scripture, and God's will? Does your soul long for it so much? Because here's the problem. Our soul wants it, but I don't think it's what our soul needs. I think what our soul needs is rest. Rest is what you need. There was a professor at Portland State University, of all places. He was a professor of psychology, so mind kind of stuff. He did this experiment. You can do this at home. I tried it this afternoon. I didn't get the same results, so Google changes all the time. But he went to Google in the image search, and he typed in the word discomfort. And he made kind of jot down some things about the images that came to describe discomfort. And he noticed images that were like this: people kind of doubled over in pain, people holding their stomach, people kind of grasping their temples as if they were in pain here, people kind of sitting down, holding different parts of their body, people just looking externally like they were in pain, but really the pain was all internal. There was no blood, there was no cuts, there was nothing. And what he said was, okay, so discomfort is internal. And he also said this: the internal discomfort, the way our society defines it, is subjective to each person. You define internally what makes you uncomfortable. You define internally what makes you uncomfortable. And you define internally what makes you uncomfortable. So then he Googled the word comfort to look at the images that appeared. And he noticed that it was things like leather couches, plush pajamas, plates of steaming hot food, a couple walking down a beach holding hands. And what he noticed was this, and this is incredible: discomfort is internal and experienced by each person's own definition. But the remedy, the way we fix discomfort, is external. Your internal doesn't feel right. Something feels off. You feel sad, you feel uncomfortable, buy a new couch. You feel uncomfortable, have some comfort food. You feel uncomfortable, grab your phone, grab your iPad, grab your Chromebook, grab your laptop, and look at the pictures or videos you shouldn't look at. You feel uncomfortable, maybe you just need a different significant other. In other words, in our society, we are told without even being aware of it, that discomfort is an internal problem, and the way you fix that internal problem is with an external solution. Don't miss that. Because listen, hear me very clearly tonight. If you hear nothing else I am going to say, an internal problem can never be fixed with external remedies. An internal problem can never be fixed with external remedies. The Gospel of Luke gives us a great illustration of this, and I love this. It's from Luke chapter 12. It's going to be on the screen. It's this parable of a rich man, right? And then Jesus is saying, and he says, he told them a parable saying, listen to this parable. It says, the land of a rich man produced plentiful, and he thought to himself. So here's the rich man's inner dialogue. He thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I'll do this. I will go and tear down my barns, and I will build larger barns, and there I will store all of my grain and all of my goods. Verse 19, key verse. And I will say to my what? I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Listen, this guy is basically saying, listen, something inside of me feels off. Life doesn't feel right. I don't feel comfort. I don't feel like in life I'm having all the pleasure and enjoyable good things I should be having. And so what does he do? He says, I don't understand it. I have all this stuff in life. I've got everything externally anyone could ever want. I've got all the right friends, all the right followers, all of this, all of this, all of this. But something still feels off. And so what does he do? He tries to convince his soul. He says, soul, what's wrong with you? You have everything you need. And listen, you and I, we laugh at this, but we do this every single day. The moment we feel internally that something isn't right, something is off, something's not fulfilling us, completing us, or giving us satisfaction, we try to convince ourselves, if I just had this, if I just did this, if I just looked at this, if I just talked to so-and-so, you know what? Then my soul would feel better. And look at what Jesus says to him, or God. It says, but God said to him, you are a fool. This night your soul is required, not the external. This night your soul is required of you. And the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself is not rich toward God. Listen to me very clearly. You will never find soul level satisfaction that you need externally in the things of this world. No relationship will ever fix what's wrong with your soul. No sports team will ever fix what's wrong with your soul. The newest iPhone, the newest whatever it is, will never fix that hunger and that aching in your soul. Looking at those things on your phone or your computer or your Chromebook or in Snapchat will never fix the aching in your soul. They are a Band-Aid when you have a problem, and that problem is your soul is at rest, and the only way to find rest is in Jesus, not an external thing. You will find rest in Jesus. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 11, come to me all who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find what? Rest for your souls. You need rest. You need rest. We don't need more comfort. We don't need more pleasures. We need rest. And rest is found in Jesus and not the things of this world. Look at the words of Jesus in Luke 14 with me real quick. Jesus, he's speaking here, and it says, now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned to them and said to them, here's what he says. He's going to describe what it looks like to live with him and follow him. And I just want you to mentally listen. Does this sound comfortable in a life full of pleasure? It says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Skip to verse 33 and you'll see this. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Here's just being honest, the frustrating paradox of the gospel, the good news of Jesus. Your soul longs for rest. And Jesus promises, come to me and I will give you rest. But he also says, when you come to me and follow me, your life should be uncomfortable. And your life should not be about pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Why? Because comfort and pleasure are things of this world. And following me means you live for a different world. I'm just curious. How many of us in this room would say, if we're really honest, we chase more for comfort and pleasure than we do Jesus? We think about and long for the things that give us joy and pleasure and happiness and comfort more than we pursue Jesus. And can I just say, a life of comfort pales in comparison to a soul at rest in God's will. Our society will tell you, find comfort, find pleasure. Can I just tell you that Christ is better than being comfortable? Christ is better than viewing what it is you view. Christ is better than having a boyfriend or a girlfriend that gets you. Christ is better than having that perfectly great Saturday afternoon where you just get to relax and do the things that make you feel good. Christ is better than what you view on your phone when no one is looking. Christ is better than all the things that we would put in the blank, because Christ is better than a life full of pleasure and comparison. Listen to me. Christ is better. Solomon is an incredible example of this. Listen to this guy from the Old Testament who had everything you could ever imagine. It says this in Ecclesiastes 2. It says, I said to myself, come, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. But I found that too was meaningless. So I said, okay, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? So after much thought, I decided to make myself happy, to cheer myself with wine. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience only happiness most people find during their brief life in this world. He's saying, I sought everything that made me feel good and everything that was happy. Here's what he did. He said, I tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself, planting a beautiful vineyard. I made gardens and parks. I filled them with all kinds of trees. I built reservoirs to collect water to irrigate my groves. I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born into my household. I had large herds and flocks, more than any of the kings who had ever lived before me. I collected great sums of silver and gold, the treasures of kings and provinces. I hired singers, both men and women, who had many beautiful concubines or prostitutes. I had everything a man or woman could desire. My life was full of comfort and pleasure, and it was everything you could ever want. I had anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found pleasure in hard work, a reward. Verse 11, but as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all meaningless. It was like chasing the wind. There was nothing worthwhile anywhere. And here's the issue. I think we all have idols in our life that come from our desire for comfort and peace, or comfort and pleasure. And we need to identify those. But the problem is, once we identify them, our tendency is to say, okay, I figured it out. Like our church has been talking about pornography this past week, and so that's why I'm sprinkling it in there every now and then, because I think it is an idol that stems from comfort and pleasure. And so let's just talk for just a second, right? Like our tendency is to say, okay, like I do seek comfort and pleasure, and I seek that through the avenue of pornography on my phone or my iPad or tablet or whatever I happen to be using. And I do that as a way to kind of fill this void in my soul that I feel like something is missing. And your tendency is to say, okay, I'm gonna beat this idol. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop doing that. that. Whatever your idol is, whatever it happens to be, I'm gonna stop doing that. And then 2 days later, you're gonna pick the idol right back up. And then you're gonna say, no, I'm gonna stop doing that again. And you're gonna, get out of my life. I'm done with this idol. And then you're gonna pick it right back up. And I love this because there is this thing inside of us that thinks that we are strong enough, that we are mature enough, that we are ready enough to just march out into the battlefield of our life and start slaying all these idols like we're some kind of David fighting Goliath. And listen, that's not the case. In the story of David and Goliath, you are not David, Jesus is David. He is the one slaying the giant in that story. And I'm gonna take us back to this passage we began this series with in 1 Samuel chapter 5 to tell you this: the only way to beat the idol of comfort and pleasure in your life is to let Jesus do it. Only Jesus can defeat our idols. Check this out, 1 Samuel chapter 5, we talked about this the first week, verse 1 through 3. When the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. So they captured the physical presence of God. The Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon, their foreign god, their idol, and they set it up beside him. So you have God and the idol of Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod rose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face down on the ground before the ark of the Lord, right? This idol fell down in the presence of God. It fell down, it crumbled, it knocked over, right? What did the people do? Pull that last verse up one more time. What did the people do? When they walk in and they see this idol laying on the ground, what did the people do? It says, so they took Dagon and put him back in his place. They walk in and they say, oh no, this thing that's so important, we need to put it back up. This is put it back up. That's us. Each and every day of our lives. Oh, there's this thing that's an idol in life. I know, but the moment it starts, let's just put it right back up. Finally, they come in the next day and look what happens. They arose early the next morning and behold, Dagon had fallen face down on the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold, and only his trunk was left. Only God can defeat our idols. So let's make this really practical. The band's gonna come out. I'm gonna give you permission right now to grab your phone or grab a notebook or a journal or whatever it is that you are bringing. I know you all at least have a phone. Pull up your note app, pull up whatever it is you want to do. And here's what I want you to do. The band's gonna come up and they're gonna dim the lights in a minute and just give you a moment to process this. Here's my question. One question, only one question. What is the thing that brings you comfort and pleasure that you pursue more than anything else? What is the thing that you pursue that brings you comfort and pleasure that is an idol in your life and you need Jesus to help you defeat it? I'm gonna give you time to write it down. And when you leave here, I want you to call a friend and tell them. Text your small group and tell them. Go home, talk to someone in your house. We don't defeat idols alone. We defeat them with Jesus and people around us.